I tell myself now that I didn't hear her clearly. That the wind swallowed her words. That exhaustion dulled my instincts. That I was already halfway gone before she spoke. But that's a lie. I heard every word. I just chose not to let them stop me. The car was still idling when she started crying. Not the quiet kind she usually saved for bedtime, but the sharp, panicked sobs that claw straight through your chest. Her fingers dug into my sleeve as if fabric alone could anchor her to the world. "Daddy," she said, voice breaking, "please don't leave me here." We were parked in my mother-in-law's driveway. Same cracked concrete. Same peeling paint on the porch railing. Same house my wife insisted was perfectly fine. I'd been here dozens of times before. Birthdays. Holidays. Forced smiles and small talk that never quite reached the eyes. But something felt different that afternoon. Heavier. Like the air itself was warning me. I turned around in my seat and looked at my daughter. Her face was flushed, eyes wide and glassy. She wasn't throwing a tantrum. She wasn't bargaining for extra screen time or trying to get out of vegetables. She was scared. "Hey," I said softly, already feeling the tension in my chest. "It's just Grandma's. You'll be okay. I'll be back soon." The words sounded rehearsed, even to me. Lines I'd learned to deliver smoothly, the way men learn to smooth over discomfort instead of confronting it. She shook her head so hard her ponytail came loose. "No. Please. I don't want to stay. Please don't leave me." I felt that familiar fork in my gut, the one that shows up when instinct and obligation collide. The place where you know what you should do, but also know what it will cost you. Before I could answer, my wife leaned across the console. "That's enough," she snapped. Her voice was sharp, clipped, the way it got when she felt challenged. She opened her door and stepped out, heels striking the pavement like punctuation marks. "Stop speaking like that," she said, yanking the back door open. "You're embarrassing us." Our daughter recoiled, shrinking into herself. I should have intervened right then. Should have unbuckled my seatbelt. Should have said something, anything, to slow the moment down. Instead, I stayed still. My wife grabbed her wrist, not violently, but firmly enough to make a point. The kind of grip that sends a message without leaving marks. "I don't want to hear another word," she said. "Do you understand?" My daughter looked at me. Not at her mother. At me. That look will follow me for the rest of my life. It wasn't anger. It wasn't defiance. It was a question. "Are you going to help me?" I opened my mouth. Closed it again. I told myself it wasn't my place to undermine my wife. That discipline was complicated. That kids exaggerated. That marriage required unity, especially in front of extended family. I told myself a lot of things men tell themselves when they're afraid of rocking the boat. "Say goodbye to Daddy," my wife said. My daughter lunged forward and wrapped her arms around my neck, squeezing like she might never let go. Her body was shaking. "Please," she whispered into my ear. "Don't leave me here." Something in her voice cracked open a door inside me I didn't want to walk through. Because if I acknowledged what she was saying, really acknowledged it, I would have to act. And acting meant conflict. Conflict meant arguments. Full of consequences I didn't feel equipped to manage. So I did what I'd learned to do best. I avoided. I kissed the top of her head. "I'll be back before you know it," I said. "Be good, okay?" Even as the words left my mouth, I knew they were hollow. She pulled back and stared at me, her lower lip trembling. I noticed then that she was clutching something in her fist. A small object, hidden against her palm. I almost asked what it was. Almost. My wife closed the door before I could change my mind. "Drive," she said, already walking toward the house. I watched my daughter through the rearview mirror as she stood in the driveway, small and rigid, her shoulders hunched as if bracing for impact. She didn't wave. I put the car in reverse. As I pulled away, her face disappeared behind the hedges lining the driveway. The silence in the car was immediate and suffocating. I gripped the steering wheel harder than necessary, jaw clenched, trying to force the tightness in my chest to loosen. "She'll be fine," I muttered to myself. "She's just sensitive." The words sounded wrong. Like I was trying to convince a witness, not myself. The drive home was only 20 minutes, but it felt longer. Every red light stretched. Every turn replayed her voice in my head. Please don't leave me here. I tried turning on the radio. Couldn't focus. Tried thinking about work, emails piling up, deadlines I was already behind on. That familiar pressure crept in, the one that always told me I didn't have room for emotional detours. I was 38 years old. A manager at a company that expected constant availability. A husband trying to keep a marriage from splintering. A father doing his best. At least, that's what I told myself. But somewhere between the highway exit and my driveway, another thought slipped in. What if I'm wrong? I shoved it away just as quickly. By the time I got home, I'd settled on a version of events that felt manageable. Kids resist change. My wife was strict but well-meaning. My daughter would calm down once the initial fear passed. Peace, I'd learned, often came wrapped in denial. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the quiet house. No toys scattered across the floor. No background noise of cartoons or humming. Just stillness. I set my keys down and leaned against the counter, suddenly exhausted. That's when my phone buzzed. A known number. I stared at the screen for a second longer than I should have. A flicker of unease stirred in my stomach. Then I shook my head and silenced it. Spam call, I told myself. Wrong number. I didn't answer. I went about my evening on autopilot, heated leftovers, scrolled through emails, stared blankly at the TV without absorbing a single word. Every so often, I'd glance at the clock, mentally calculating how much longer until we were supposed to pick her up. She'll be fine, I repeated. But the words were starting to fray. As night settled in, the house felt too quiet. Too empty. I checked my phone again. No messages. No updates. Just that missed call. I told myself I'd call later. After I finished one more thing. After I had a better handle on the anxiety tightening around my ribs. I didn't know yet that this was the last calm moment I'd have for a long time. I didn't know that the decision I made in that driveway, the one to leave, had already set something irreversible in motion. All I knew was that somewhere, miles away, my daughter was sitting in a house she'd begged me not to leave her in. And for the first time, the silence felt less like peace, and more like a warning. Peace, I've learned, is a word we use when we're afraid of the truth. That night, I kept telling myself everything was fine. Not because I believed it, but because believing anything else would have required me to act. I moved through the house like a guest who'd overstayed his welcome. Every room felt slightly off, as if something essential had been removed and the air hadn't adjusted yet. My daughter's shoes were still by the door. One sneaker tipped on its side, laces loose, like she'd stepped out of them in a hurry. I nudged them back into place with my foot. Order mattered to me. Always had. I liked things neat, predictable. At work, that made me reliable. The guy who didn't panic. The guy who smoothed things over. At home it made me quiet. I checked my phone again. No new calls. No texts from my wife. That should have reassured me. Instead, it made my chest tighten. I opened my laptop, more out of habit than purpose. Dozens of unread emails glared back at me. Subject lines stacked with urgency, quarterly targets, missed deliverables, a reminder about my upcoming performance review. I stared at the screen, trying to summon the familiar sense of pressure. The one that usually drowned everything else out. It didn't work. My mind kept drifting back to the driveway. To my daughter's face. To the way she'd held on to me like she knew something I didn't. I shut the laptop harder than necessary. This was the problem, I told myself. I was tired. Burned out. Overthinking things. Men my age didn't have the luxury of spiraling over every emotional moment. We had responsibilities. Mortgages. Careers that punished distraction. And marriages that required compromise. That was the word my wife liked to use. Compromise. She believed in structure. In rules. In obedience. She said children needed firmness or they'd grow weak. She said softness was how you raised failures. Sometimes, late at night, I wondered if that was what she thought of me. My phone buzzed on the counter. I flinched. This time it was her. She settled down yet? I asked when I answered. The pause. Just long enough to register. She cried for a bit, my wife said. Then she stopped. Like they always do. The words were casual, efficient. Is she okay? I asked. Another pause. Shorter this time. She's fine, she said. Don't start. I rubbed my forehead. I'm not starting anything. She seemed really upset. She was being manipulative, my wife snapped. You always fall for it. That's why she does it. The conversation felt familiar. Scripted. We'd had versions of it before, about bedtime, homework, backtalk. Moments where I hesitated and she pushed harder. Unity, she called it. I called it exhaustion. I just don't want her scared, I said. She needs to learn, my wife replied. And you need to stop undermining me. There was the accusation that always shut me down. Okay, I said. The word tasted bitter. Good, she said. We'll pick her up later. Don't make this into something it's not. The line went dead. I stood there staring at my phone long after the call ended. My reflection stared back at me from the dark screen, older than I felt, more tired than I admitted. Don't make this into something it's not. That sentence followed me for the rest of the evening. I tried distracting myself with work again. Typed a few emails. Deleted them. Rewrote the same sentence 3 times without sending it. My thoughts kept circling the same uncomfortable truth. I was good at avoiding conflict. At work, it made me dependable. I absorbed pressure so others didn't have to. I stayed late. Took responsibility. Smiled through stress. At home, it made me invisible. I told myself that keeping the peace was a form of protection. That shielding my daughter from arguments was better than exposing her to them. But peace, I was starting to realize, had a cost. And someone else was paying it. The house creaked as the night settled in. I poured myself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. That's when my phone buzzed again. A known number. My stomach dropped. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering just above it. A pulse thudded in my ears. Every instinct told me to answer. Every learned behavior told me not to. If it was important, they'd leave a message, I reasoned. I silenced the phone. The moment it went quiet, a wave of unease washed over me, sharp and immediate. I pushed it down. This is what adulthood looked like, I told myself. Choosing which fires to put out. Letting some burn themselves out. I went to the living room and sat on the couch, staring at the blank television. The remote rested untouched in my hand. My daughter's laughter echoed faintly in my memory. The way she used to narrate her drawings to me. The way she'd crawl into my lap when she was scared of thunderstorms. I wondered if she was scared now. I checked the clock. Too early to worry, I decided. Minutes passed. Then more. The silence grew heavier, pressing in on me from all sides. I found myself replaying the moment my wife grabbed her wrist. Not violent. Controlled. Intentional. A thought crept in, unwelcome and sharp. What if this wasn't about discipline? I stood up abruptly and paced the room, agitation buzzing under my skin. I told myself I was being paranoid. That stress was distorting my perspective. My wife wasn't a monster. Her mother wasn't dangerous. Families were complicated. Parenting was messy. I repeated those truths like mantras. Then my phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. This time, I couldn't ignore it. I picked it up, my heart pounding, and stared at the screen as it vibrated in my hand. I didn't know yet that the lie I'd been clinging to, the one we call peace, was about to shatter. All I knew was that whatever waited on the other end of that call was going to force me to confront everything I'd been avoiding. I took a breath. And finally, I answered. I answered the phone already knowing my life was about to divide itself into a before and an after. Hello. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. For half a second, there was only background noise, muffled voices, the distant echo of movement. Then a woman spoke. Is this Mr.? Yes, I said. This is him. My name is Rachel. I'm a nurse at Memorial ER. The room seemed to tilt. I'm calling about your daughter. Every muscle in my body locked at once, like I'd been struck with electricity. My grip tightened around the phone. What happened? I asked. She came in about 10 minutes ago, the nurse said gently. She was alone. Alone. The word landed wrong. Too sharp. Too final. Walked in by herself, the nurse continued. She won't speak. But she asked us to call you. My mouth went dry. Where's her mother? Another pause. This one heavier. She didn't come with her, the nurse said. Sir, how far away are you? I'm 20 minutes out, I said, already grabbing my keys. What's wrong with her? I need you to come as quickly as you can, she replied. And drive safely. There was the phrase they use when something is very wrong but they're not allowed to say it yet. Is she hurt? I demanded. She has injuries, the nurse said carefully. She's stable. But there's something else. What? She's holding on to something, she said. She refuses to let go of it. My chest constricted so tightly I had to lean against the counter to keep from falling. What is it? I asked. I think it's best you see for yourself. The call ended before I could ask another question. I stood there for a heartbeat, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to nothing but the hollow buzz of dead air. Then my body took over. I was out the door in seconds, barely registering that I'd left the lights on, that the house behind me was still silent and waiting. The night air slapped me awake as I sprinted to the car. I don't remember buckling my seatbelt. I do remember the engine roaring to life. The speedometer climbed faster than it ever had before. Red lights blurred. My hands shook on the steering wheel. Every rational thought dissolved into one relentless question. How did she get there? There was miles away. Busy roads. Intersections. A child walking alone at night. The image alone made my stomach twist. I thought of the driveway. Of her standing there as I pulled away. I should have stayed. The thought hit me so hard I gasped. I called my wife. Straight to voicemail. Voicemail. I tried her mother's number. No answer. My pulse thundered in my ears as the hospital came into view. I screeched into the parking lot, barely managing to park between the lines. I didn't bother locking the car. The automatic doors slid open as I ran inside. I panted to the security desk. My daughter. She's here. The guard didn't ask for details. He just nodded and waved me through. The smell hit me first, antiseptic and something metallic beneath it. The waiting room buzzed with quiet urgency. Monitors beeped. Shoes squeaked against linoleum. I spotted the nurse immediately. She stood near the triage desk, her expression softening when she saw my face. You're her father, she said. Yes. Where is she? She gestured down the hall. Room 6. I followed her, my legs feeling like they might give out at any moment. She hasn't said a word since she arrived, the nurse said as we walked. But she knew your number. She insisted we call. Was anyone with her? I asked. No, she said quietly. She came in alone. The words echoed. Room 6 was small. Right. Too clean. My daughter sat on the exam bed, feet dangling just above the floor. Her shoulders were hunched, arms wrapped tightly around herself. She looked smaller than I remembered. Hey, I whispered. Her head snapped up. For a split second, her face crumpled. Then she slid off the bed and ran. I dropped to my knees just in time to catch her as she collided with me, burying her face in my chest. Her whole body shook as she clung to me. I'm here, I said over and over. I've got you. I've got you. She didn't speak. I felt it then, the tremor beneath her skin, the way she flinched when someone walked past the door. I pulled back just enough to look at her. That's when I saw her arm. Dark bruises bloomed along her forearm, finger-shaped and unmistakable. There was a thin cut near her elbow, already cleaned but still angry red. My vision blurred. What happened? I whispered. She shook her head violently. My chest burned with something fierce and protective and far too late. The nurse stepped closer. Sir, she said softly, there's something else. My daughter's hand tightened around the object she'd been clutching since she ran to me. Her knuckles were white. Sweetheart, I said gently, can you show me what you're holding? She hesitated. Then, slowly, she opened her palm. It was a button. Torn cleanly from fabric. I stared at it, my mind racing. That was on Grandpa's jacket, she whispered. The sound of her voice, thin, fractured, hit me harder than any blow. My knees went weak. The nurse inhaled sharply. "Sir," she said, "I'm going to need you to step outside for a moment." "Why?" I asked, though I already knew. "We've contacted hospital security," she said, "and Child Protective Services." The room seemed to close in. Did she do the right thing? I asked quietly. The nurse met my eyes. Yes. I pressed my forehead to my daughter's hair, breathing her in like oxygen. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. "I should have listened." She didn't answer. She just held on to me. As they led me out of the room, my hands were shaking uncontrollably. In the hallway, a police officer stood waiting. "Sir," he said, not unkindly, "we need to ask you a few questions." I nodded, because in that moment, standing under fluorescent lights with my daughter's fear still clinging to my skin, one truth was undeniable. The call I'd almost ignored hadn't just brought me to the hospital. It had split my life in two. And there was no going back to who I'd been before. There are questions that don't need answers. I learned that sitting alone in a hard plastic chair outside room 6, staring at a wall the color of old bones, while my daughter lay a few feet away behind a closed door. No matter how many times the officer asked me to recount the day, my mind kept drifting back to the same moment. Her fingers digging into my sleeve, her voice cracking as she begged me not to leave. I answered their questions anyway. Addresses. Facts stripped of emotion, because that was the only way I could keep from breaking apart. "Yes," I said. "She was dropped off around 4. "Yes, my wife was there." "No, I didn't see any injuries when I left." Each sentence felt like a confession. The officer nodded, writing everything down with calm, practiced efficiency. He didn't accuse me of anything. That somehow made it worse. "Sir," he said finally, "right now our priority is your daughter's safety." I swallowed. "Is she going to be okay?" "She's physically stable," he said. "But we're concerned." Concerned. It was such a small word for something that felt so massive. A doctor came out a few minutes later. Middle-aged. Tired eyes. The kind of man who'd seen too much pain to sugarcoat anything. "She has bruising consistent with being restrained," he said quietly. "And a minor laceration that suggests she tried to pull away." My hands curled into fists. "Was she?" I couldn't finish the sentence. The doctor held my gaze. "We don't have evidence of sexual assault," he said carefully. "But trauma isn't always visible." I nodded, even though my throat was closing. "She won't speak," I said. "Except to me." "That's not uncommon," he replied. "Children protect themselves with silence when words feel unsafe." I pressed my palms against my knees, grounding myself, trying not to imagine what had happened in that house. Trying not to picture hands that weren't mine grabbing her arm. Voices raised. Doors closing. Guilt spread through me like poison. If I had stayed. If I had listened. If I had been the man she needed instead of the man who avoided discomfort. They let me back into the room once the initial assessments were done. My daughter sat on the bed again, wrapped in a thin hospital blanket that swallowed her small frame. The button was still in her hand. Evidence. She looked up when I entered. Her eyes were tired. Older somehow. I sat beside her slowly, careful not to crowd her space. "You don't have to talk," I said. "Not if you don't want to." She nodded. "I just want you to know something," I continued. "None of this is your fault. Not even a little." Her grip on the blanket tightened. I took a breath. "I should have listened to you." Her eyes flicked up to mine. "I'm sorry," I said. The words felt small, but they were all I had. "I won't make that mistake again." She leaned into me then, resting her head against my side. Silent. Heavy. A social worker came in not long after. She introduced herself softly, explaining each step before taking it, giving my daughter choices whenever possible. Watching someone offer my child the control I hadn't, I felt something inside me crack open. "Can I stay with my dad?" my daughter asked suddenly. The words startled all of us. The social worker smiled gently. "Yes," she said. "You can." My chest tightened. She hadn't said much. But she'd said enough. Later, when the room was quiet again, my phone buzzed. My wife. I stared at the screen, a cold heaviness settling over me. I stepped out into the hallway before answering. "What did you do?" she demanded the moment I picked up. "What did I do?" I repeated, stunned. "They called my mother," she snapped. "They're asking questions. This is ridiculous." I closed my eyes. "She's hurt," I said. "She came to the you're alone." "That's not my fault," she said. "She's dramatic. You know that." Something in me shifted then. Quietly. Permanently. "She was scared," I said. "And I left her." There was a pause. "You're overreacting," my wife said. "If you make this a big deal, you'll ruin everything." Everything. A marriage. Our image. Our carefully constructed version of normal. I looked back through the glass window at my daughter, curled up on the bed, clutching that button like a lifeline. "No," I said slowly. "What ruined everything already happened." "You don't know what you're doing," she said, her voice rising. "Think about your job. Think about custody." For the first time, the threats didn't land. "I am thinking about custody," I replied. "That's why I'm staying." I ended the call before she could respond. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clearer than it had been in years. Back in the room, my daughter looked up at me. "Daddy?" she whispered. "Yes," I said immediately. "You're not leaving again, right?" The question pierced straight through me. I knelt beside her bed so we were eye level. "No," I said. "I'm right here. And I'm not going anywhere." She studied my face, searching for something. Then, slowly she nodded. As she closed her eyes, exhaustion finally pulling her under, I stayed exactly where I was. Because I understood something now. What she wouldn't say, the details, the fear, the full truth, didn't matter as much as what she'd already shown me. Silence can be a language. And this time I was finally listening. There's a moment when fear stops being loud. It doesn't scream anymore. It settles. Becomes cold. Precise. And suddenly, you understand that whatever comes next is going to stay with you forever. That's how I felt sitting across from the detective in a small consultation room just off the ER. The lights were too bright. The chair was bolted to the floor. Everything about the space said this wasn't temporary. He slid a recorder across the table and asked for my permission to turn it on. I nodded. "State your name for the record," he said. I did. Then he asked me to tell the story from the beginning. So I did. I told him about the driveway, about the crying, about how my wife said she was being manipulative. I told him how I hesitated, how I convinced myself it wasn't serious. I didn't try to make myself look better, because the truth didn't allow for that. "And you left her there anyway?" he asked. "Yes." The word landed like a weight on my chest. "Why?" There was the question I'd been avoiding since the moment I pulled away from that house. But I stared at my hands. They were steady now. That surprised me. "Because I didn't want to fight," I said quietly. "Because I thought keeping the peace was more important than trusting my instincts." The detective didn't react. He just nodded and wrote something down. "Did you think she was in danger?" he asked. I hesitated. "I didn't want to think that," I said. He looked up at me then. Not accusing. Not sympathetic. Just factual. "But you did," he said. I swallowed. Yes. That admission hurt more than anything else so far. He continued asking questions about my wife, her parents, the dynamic in their house, about past incidents, raised voices, physical discipline. Each answer peeled back another layer of denial. When the interview ended, I felt exposed. Like every excuse I'd built my life on had been stripped away and catalogued. Outside the room, a CPS caseworker waited for me. She had a folder tucked under her arm and a calm, measured voice. "Right now," she said, "your daughter will not be returning to that environment." I nodded. "She can stay with me." "We're evaluating all options," she replied. "Including that one." The implication was clear. Including the possibility that I might not be considered safe either. That was the cost of looking away. I was allowed back into my daughter's room once the interviews were done. She was asleep, curled on her side, one hand still clenched around the edge of the blanket. I sat in the chair beside her bed and watched her breathe. Every inhale felt like a gift. My phone buzzed again. My wife. I stepped into the hallway before answering. "Are you happy now?" she demanded. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "They're investigating," I said. "They found injuries." "She exaggerates," my wife snapped. "You know that. You always let her get to you." Something hardened in me. "They saw the bruises," I said. "Doctors. Police. This isn't about feelings anymore." She laughed sharply. "So what? You're going to turn on your own family?" I closed my eyes. "I'm protecting my daughter." "You're destroying us," she said. "If you go through with this, there's no coming back." I leaned against the wall, the cool surface grounding me. There was no us the moment she begged me not to leave, and I did it anyway, I said. Silence. Then quieter, more dangerous. "You think you're some hero now?" she asked. "Wait until they ask why you left her there. Wait until they ask why you didn't stop it." The words stung because they were true. "They already asked," I said. "And I told them." "You told them what?" "The truth." Her breath caught. "You just signed away everything," she said. "Maybe. But for the first time, I didn't feel like I was drowning." I ended the call without another word. Back in the room, my daughter stirred. Her eyes fluttered open. "Daddy." "I'm here," I said immediately. She looked at my face for a long moment, like she was trying to read something new there. "Am I in trouble?" she asked softly. My chest tightened. "No," I said. "You were brave." She frowned slightly. "Even though I told?" "Especially because you told," I said. She thought about that. Then she nodded as if filing it away. Later, a uniformed officer came to update me. Charges were being considered. Statements were being taken. Things were moving. "This will get complicated," he said. "There may be court involvement. Custody hearings." "I understand," I replied. And I did. Because the story I'd been telling myself, that silence kept people safe, was gone. Silence didn't protect my daughter. It protected my comfort. That night, as she slept, I stayed awake in the chair beside her bed, replaying every moment I'd chosen quiet over confrontation. I saw a pattern. At work. At home. In my marriage. Avoidance disguised as maturity. Peace purchased with someone else's pain. By morning, my fear had settled into something else. Resolve. I didn't know how much this was going to cost me. My job. My marriage. My reputation. But as I watched my daughter breathe, I understood something with painful clarity. If I wanted to be the man she believed would protect her, I was going to have to pay that cost.